I'm a 45-year-old man, been married to my wife for over 20 years, and we have a 17-year-old daughter together. We've been through a lot as a family, but nothing could have prepared me for what happened last night. To give you some background, things haven't been easy lately. I lost my job about 6 months ago, and since then we've been struggling financially. Bills are piling up, and every trip to the grocery store feels like a reminder of how much we've lost. I've tried to stay positive, but the stress has been eating away at me. My wife, well, she hasn't taken it well either. We've been arguing more than ever. I don't blame her. I really don't. It's hard living paycheck to paycheck when we used to be so comfortable. But I thought no matter how tough things got, we'd still be a team. Turns out I was wrong. Last night, we were sitting down for dinner. Nothing fancy, just a simple meal I managed to put together with what we had. My wife sat across from me, mostly silent. We hadn't said much to each other all day, probably trying to avoid another argument. Our daughter, let's call her Emma, came to the table, sat down, and just stared at her plate. Then she said it, cold, flat, like it was nothing. "I'm not eating this. This is food for the poor." I froze. I didn't even know how to react. Before I could say anything, my wife shifted uncomfortably in her chair, and Emma turned to me, anger flashing in her eyes. She stood up, her voice getting louder with every word. "Mom, when are you going to leave this poor man and find yourself a rich lover? I'm tired of living like this." The silence that followed, I can't even describe it. My chest felt like it had been ripped open. I looked at my wife, hoping, praying she'd say something, defend me, tell Emma to stop. But she just sat there. She didn't say a word. Emma stormed off to her room, slamming the door behind her, and I was left sitting there, shattered. I didn't move for a while, just staring at the empty seat where my daughter had been. The words kept echoing in my head. Leave this poor man. It felt like everything I'd been holding on to, hope, love, family, was slipping away. My daughter, the little girl I used to tuck in at night, didn't just hate the situation. She hated me. She saw me as the problem, as the reason her life was hard, and the worst part, I couldn't argue with her. I couldn't tell her she was wrong because deep down I was starting to believe it too. And my wife, her silence was louder than any argument we'd ever had. After that dinner, after Emma's outburst, my wife and I sat in our bedroom in complete silence. It wasn't an unfamiliar silence. We'd grown used to it these past months. But tonight, it felt suffocating. She was brushing her hair, eyes fixed on the mirror, while I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the floor, trying to gather the courage to speak. Finally, I couldn't hold it in anymore. "Why didn't you say anything?" My voice cracked, betraying the hurt I'd been trying to bury. "You just sat there. She basically called me worthless, and you didn't even defend me." She paused for a moment, putting the brush down, but didn't look at me. "What did you want me to say?" I blinked in disbelief. What did I want you to say? I don't know, maybe that I'm still her father? That I'm doing my best? Something, anything. She finally turned around, arms crossed, that same cold look on her face that she's had for weeks now. "Look, you think I don't see what's going on here? You think I don't feel it too? We can't even afford the basics anymore. Maybe Emma's right." That hit me like a punch to the gut. "You think she's right?" I asked, my voice rising. "Do you feel the same way? Are you seriously telling me that you've been considering leaving me because I lost my job?" She rolled her eyes and sighed like I was the unreasonable one. "I didn't say that. But let's be real. This life, it's not what I signed up for. I didn't marry you to scrape by like this. You used to take care of things, you used to provide, and now look at us." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "So what? Because I hit a rough patch, I'm suddenly disposable? You don't love me anymore because I'm not bringing in money?" She shrugged, a smirk pulling at the corners of her lips. "Love doesn't pay the bills." I felt something break inside me in that moment. Her words were so callous, so devoid of any empathy or understanding. This wasn't the woman I thought I knew, the woman I'd spent over 2 decades of my life with. She wasn't my partner anymore. She was a stranger, someone who saw me as nothing more than a failed investment. "Wow," I muttered, standing up from the bed. "I never realized how little you thought of me." She didn't say anything after that, just turned off the light and crawled into bed, leaving me standing there in the dark. I didn't even want to be in the same room as her, but I had nowhere else to go. So I laid down next to her, feeling more alone than I ever had in my entire life. The days following that dinner only made things worse. I couldn't bring myself to talk to Emma at all. Every time I saw her, the memory of her words hit me all over again, like a fresh wound reopening. She didn't try to talk to me either. It was like we were living in separate worlds under the same roof. As for my wife, her tone had shifted from cold to downright venomous. Every word she spoke to me was laced with disdain, her sentences clipped and sharp, as if she couldn't stand to even be near me. I was walking on eggshells, trying to avoid any confrontation. But it didn't matter. She was determined to make sure I knew how much of a failure I had become. Then, one night, as I was lying in bed, I overheard a conversation between Emma and her mother in the living room. I hadn't meant to eavesdrop, but their voices were hard to ignore. "Mom, we can't keep living like this," Emma was saying, her voice low but urgent. "You need to do something. Find someone else. Someone who can actually take care of us." There was a long pause before my wife replied. "Emma, it's not that simple. I've been with him for so long." "So what?" Emma shot back. "We're miserable. You're miserable. He can't provide for us anymore. There are men out there who could give us a better life." "I don't know, Emma," my wife said. "Half of me agrees with you, but the other half, I don't know if I can just walk away." My heart was pounding in my chest. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My own daughter was pushing my wife to leave me for a wealthier man, and my wife was considering it? It felt like my entire world was crumbling around me. Their conversation was cut short by the ringing of my wife's phone. She picked it up, and I didn't get to hear what her final decision would be. But the damage was done. I lay there in the dark, unable to move, unable to think straight. My family, the people I'd spent my life loving and providing for, were plotting to throw me out like I was nothing more than dead weight, all because I wasn't rich enough anymore. I didn't sleep that night. How could I, knowing my own flesh and blood saw me as nothing more than a burden? For weeks, the silence in the house had become unbearable. It was like I didn't exist. My wife and daughter barely spoke to me, and honestly, I was done trying. I didn't have the energy anymore. The walls of this house had started to feel more like a prison than a home, and I could tell they didn't care. It was around this time that I started noticing things. My daughter Emma began coming home with expensive gifts, designer bags, new clothes. She never mentioned where they came from, and I didn't ask. What was the point? My wife, on the other hand, started wearing jewelry I'd never seen before. Gold bracelets, diamond earrings, the kind of things we definitely couldn't afford, not with our financial situation. And then there was her phone. She kept it glued to her, constantly checking it, making sure I couldn't see the screen. If I ever came near her when she was texting, she'd shut it off like she was hiding something. At first, I tried to push the suspicion away, telling myself that I was just being paranoid, but deep down, I knew. I could feel it. They'd found someone else. Someone to replace me as the husband and father I was clearly failing to be. It all came to a head one afternoon. I'd been out for a job interview, a rare glimmer of hope in an otherwise hopeless time. The interview had ended earlier than expected, so I decided to head home. As I walked through the door, I noticed the house was quiet. Too quiet. Then I heard it. Strange noises, muffled voices coming from upstairs, from my bedroom. My heart started pounding in my chest, and I felt my body move on autopilot, taking me up the stairs one shaky step at a time. I already knew what I was about to find, but part of me still hoped somehow that I was wrong. I wasn't. I pushed open the bedroom door, and there she was, my wife, wrapped up in bed with another man. I don't even remember what he looked like. All I saw was red. I lost it. In a fit of rage, I grabbed him, yanking him out of the bed, and threw him towards the door. He stumbled, pulling his pants up as he bolted for the exit. I didn't care who he was or how long this had been going on. I just wanted him gone. My wife stood there, draped in nothing but a bedsheet, her face a mixture of shock and guilt. I could barely look at her. "You betrayed me," I spat, my voice shaking with anger. "I gave you everything I had, and this is how you repay me?" She didn't say anything at first, just stared at me like I was some kind of inconvenience. When she finally spoke, her voice was cold, detached. "Maybe if you had been more of a man, this wouldn't have happened." Her words hit me like a slap to the face, but before I could respond, the front door opened and Emma walked in. I hadn't even realized she was out. She glanced at me briefly, then her eyes fell on the man I had just thrown out. To my shock, she greeted him like an old friend. "Oh, Dad," she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "It seems you've finally found out." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The man my wife had been with, Emma knew him. She had known this entire time. You knew?" I stammered, my voice barely above a whisper. She rolled her eyes like I was the one being ridiculous. "Of course I knew. What did you think? That we were just going to keep pretending everything's fine? This is better for everyone." At that moment, something in me snapped. All the anger, the pain, the betrayal, it all came flooding out. "You're not my family anymore," I said, my voice firm but broken. "Both of you get out. I don't want to see either of you in my house again." Emma scoffed, a twisted smile playing on her lips. "Well, thank God for that." Without another word, they both gathered their things. My wife didn't even look back as she left with Emma, walking out of the house that we had built together, the home that had once been filled with love and laughter. Now, all that remained were the broken pieces of a family that had crumbled under the weight of greed and betrayal. As the door closed behind them, the silence in the house became deafening. I was alone, but for the first time in a long time, I realized that maybe being alone was better than living a lie. After that night, everything changed. I didn't waste any time. The very next morning, I filed for divorce. I didn't even bother discussing it with my wife. There was nothing left to talk about. She had made her choices, and now I was making mine. Emma, I decided I was done being her father. The moment she stood there, mocking me after I found out about the affair, I knew she wasn't the daughter I once loved. She had chosen her side, and it wasn't mine. I made sure everyone knew what had happened. I told my relatives, our mutual friends, everyone who would listen. I wasn't going to be the one left with a stain on my reputation while they carried on pretending everything was fine. My wife and daughter had betrayed me in the worst possible way, and I wasn't going to let them hide from that. The truth spread quickly, and people were shocked, at least those who hadn't already known. Turns out, some had suspected it for a while but didn't have the guts to say anything to me. After the divorce was finalized, I cut off all contact. No more pretending, no more apologies, no more guilt. I moved out of the house and into a small apartment while I figured things out. I focused on myself for the first time in years. I poured every ounce of energy I had into rebuilding my life, getting back on my feet, and proving to myself that I was more than what they had reduced me to. It wasn't easy, but within a few months things started turning around. I managed to land a job at a decent company, and from there, my career took off. I worked my way up quickly, faster than I ever imagined. Promotions came one after another, and soon enough, I was earning more than I ever had before. My financial struggles became a distant memory, and before I knew it, I was living a life of comfort and luxury again. I bought myself a new house, a nice car, Everything I had lost, I gained back tenfold. Meanwhile, my ex-wife and Emma didn't fare as well. The lover they had thrown me away for? Turns out his wealth was built on shaky ground. Not long after our divorce, he went bankrupt. I couldn't help but laugh when I heard the news. The man they had pinned all their hopes on was nothing more than a fraud, and now they were left scrambling, living in the same kind of poverty they had tried to escape by betraying me. Then one day it happened. They came crawling back. I'll never forget the moment my ex-wife knocked on my door, Emma standing beside her. They looked different, worn out, desperate. Gone was the arrogance they had once flaunted so easily. My wife tried to speak, but I cut her off before she could even get a word out. "I'm not interested," I said coldly, my voice devoid of any warmth. She pleaded with me, saying they had made a mistake, that they were sorry, and they just wanted another chance. Emma, standing there silently, didn't even have the nerve to look me in the eye. I laughed. I couldn't help it. The audacity of it all was almost too much. "You think I'm going to forgive you?" I asked, shaking my head in disbelief. "After everything you did? After you threw me away like garbage? You expect me to welcome you back into my life?" My ex-wife looked like she was about to cry, but I didn't care. I felt nothing. Whatever love or pity I once had for them was long gone. "You made your choice," I said, my tone icy. "You thought you could do better without me, and now you have to live with that. I'm not your safety net, and I'm sure as hell not your backup plan. Forget you ever knew me." They stood there, stunned, not knowing what to say. I could see the realization dawning on them. This wasn't some temporary setback they could talk their way out of. This was their reality now. I closed the door in their faces without another word. In the end, I got the one thing they never expected: peace. While they struggled and fought to regain the life they had so carelessly thrown away, I thrived. My career continued to flourish, and I found happiness on my own terms. The irony wasn't lost on me. They had left me for a better life. But in the end, I was the one who came out on top. And as for them, well, they became nothing more than a distant memory, a cautionary tale of greed, betrayal, and the price you pay when you throw away the people who truly care about you. I didn't forgive them. I didn't need to. My success was the sweetest revenge I could have ever asked for.